Smoking crack, Mr. Sams? There's no mistake.
No, sir. It wasn't me, sir. I swear it wasn't.
But when there's somebody gonna throw somebody else off of the roof or whatever the case may be, crackhead hit the scene real hard,
In 2011, Jermaine Hopkins, the future of black cinema, was arrested for attempting to buy 200 pounds of marijuana from an undercover police officer. When the handcuffs clicked shut, Hopkins did not just lose his freedom, he lost his fame, his career, and his reputation. But that fall was only the beginning. What shocked the public even more was that Hopkins did not fall because of drugs alone. Behind that arrest were secrets Hollywood had tried to bury for more than a decade. People once called him Hollywood's forgotten talent, but now as the past is slowly being uncovered, it seems even Hollywood itself grows fearful at the mention of Jermaine Hopkins. Jermaine R. Huggy. Hopkins was born on August 23, 1974 in Newark, New Jersey, a city once described as a living hell of America. There, violence was not news. It was the background noise of every night's sleep. Every morning, people woke to shattered glass bullet shells and traces of another normal night in Newark. In the 1980s, the crack epidemic swept through the housing projects. In childhood, there meant learning to keep your head down and run fast. Kids where I'm from didn't dream of being on TV, Hopkins said. They just tried to survive another day. His voice choked as he spoke, as if he could still hear gunfire echoing from the old streets. I heard gunshots every night. To me, that wasn't a movie scene, that was real life. His mother, Darlene Hopkins, was the only pillar holding up their damp 8th-floor apartment in the housing projects. During the day, she washed dishes. At night, she cleaned hotel rooms. And late at night, she sold fast food just to pay the electricity bill. Some months, she had to choose between paying rent and buying dinner for her son. His father disappeared when Jermaine was too young to remember his face. To Jermaine, his mother was the gentlest light. But for a restless teenager, her words were like the wind heard, but never kept. He turned instead to the men his neighborhood admired, dealers, hustlers, and the so-called heroes, in the eyes of kids with no future. I was always drawn to the villains, Hopkins admitted, maybe because I saw in them a kind of freedom I never had. At that time, surviving one summer was already a victory. When he spoke of those years, his voice grew quiet. Crack came like a storm. The whole neighborhood caught fire. Everyone had to choose sell use or die. Amid that hell, Darlene still believed her son deserved something better. She saved every coin she could send Jermaine to church camp, forced him to read, and kept him away from the alley kids. My mom tried to pull me out of the ghetto, he recalled, but I kept running back to it like the darkness was my home. In the end, it was his mother who pulled him out of Newark's darkness. The role that changed his life. In 1988, when Warner Brothers held a casting call for the school drama, Lean on Me in New York, Jermaine Hopkins was only 14 years old. His mother took a bold gamble, driving her son 40 miles from Newark to Manhattan with only a few dollars in her pocket. She didn't expect much, just a glimmer of hope. Hundreds of teenagers showed up that day, but Hopkins, who had never acted, had no resume, and no agent stood out for his raw attitude and the hardened eyes of a kid who had lived the streets for real. Director John G. Avildsen, who made Rocky and the Karate Kid, said he was looking for a face untouched by Hollywood. And Hopkins was exactly that. He was cast as Thomas Sams, a drug-addicted student redeemed by Principal Joe Clark, played by Morgan Freeman. Hopkins didn't act the role, he lived it. On screen, the boy cried. In real life, they were real tears. Director John G. Avildsen saw that. He told Freeman, teach this kid how to survive, not just how to act. On set, Freeman became his mentor. The scene where Sams almost jumps off the school roof became iconic, because for Hopkins, it came from real memories. He had seen bodies fall from rooftops before. When Lean on Me premiered in March 1989, it grossed nearly $32 million on a $10 million budget, and Hopkins, the unknown kid from Newark, suddenly became the heart of the film. No formal training, no technique, just truth and instinct. And that made Hollywood unable to look away. After Lean on Me, Jermaine Hopkins became an overnight sensation. He was called the Face of Hope, and magazines dubbed him the Kid with Street Soul. 3 years later, Hopkins returned in Juice, the cult classic of youth rebellion that became the manifesto of the early 1990s hip-hop generation. Alongside soon-to-be legends like Tupac Shakur Omar Epps and Khalil Kane Hopkins played Steele, the kind funny friend who gets dragged into a deadly spiral. Off-screen, Hopkins and Tupac grew close. Pac took him all over New York, showing him how to enter the adult world without losing himself. But an off-script incident almost cost Hopkins the role. While visiting relatives in North Carolina during pre-production, he was shot in the leg. A few days later, he returned to the set with a light cast, telling producers he had hurt himself playing basketball. The crew was skeptical, but he begged to stay. Director Ernest Dickerson and his team considered replacing him because the schedule was too tight. But in the end, they trusted him. They adjusted scenes, cut down shots where Hopkins had to run or jump, and kept him in the film. That real-life bullet wound became an invisible mark on Juice, a silent proof of a young actor's fear, passion, and desperation not to lose his chance. With a modest budget of $8 million, Juice earned over $20 million at the North American box office. It wasn't just a commercial hit. It was a cultural milestone portraying young black men with fear, ambition, and conflict without falling into stereotypes. After Juice, Hopkins kept his momentum with Strapped 1993, an HBO film directed by Forrest Whitaker. The film received critical acclaim and helped Hopkins move beyond his street kid image, proving he could handle complex emotional roles. He went on to appear in Fat Beach 1996 and Def Jam's How to Be a Player. 1997, both part of the popular hip-hop comedy wave of the time. Fat Beach, though, dismissed by critics as silly fun, grossed over $3 million on a budget under $500,000, making it one of the year's surprise indie hits. By then, Hopkins had become a reliable box office draw in youth-oriented black entertainment, cheap, funny, but full of soul. Between 1995 and 1998, his average pay ranged from $50,000 to $150,000 per film, plus steady income from sitcoms like The Wayans Brothers, where he played Dupree for 2 years, earning about $4,000 to $6,000 per episode, the standard rate for supporting actors on WB Network at the time. He also appeared in Moshe Murder 1 and later Law & Order SVU. Throughout the 1990s, Jermaine Hopkins remained a familiar face to TV audiences. But then Hollywood changed its taste. By the late 1990s, the urban drama genre, the kind that had launched Hopkins and Tupac, started to fade. Major studios like Warner and Paramount cut back on films with predominantly black casts. Actors once celebrated like Hopkins suddenly had no place. He kept trying to make a comeback, taking small roles in indie films, sitcoms, and cable TV projects. But none brought him back to prominence. Hollywood forgot the boy named Sams, while the new generation of studios only cared about rappers and flashy stars with fan bases not acting skill. By the end of the 1990s, Jermaine Hopkins began to slip quietly out of the spotlight. His savings dwindled and life turned harsh again, just like Newark, where every dream had an expiration date. No lead roles, no TV contracts, just guest appearances in Law & Order SVU, Moesha, a few small independent films, and then nothing. His income became unstable, mostly relying on what was left from his golden years. Hopkins disappeared from the screen for nearly a decade, until 2011 when his name returned to the headlines not for a movie role, but for an arrest that shook Hollywood. The 2011 arrest, when a teen star became a suspect. On a December morning in 2011, the Arizona State Police Department held a brief press conference. Within hours, the news spread across Hollywood. Jermaine R. Huggy Hopkins, the actor who moved audiences in Lean on Me, 1989, and Juice 1992, had been arrested in a large-scale drug operation. According to records from the Avondale Police Department and the Arizona Department of Public Safety, Hopkins was accused of attempting to purchase 200 pounds, about 90 kilograms of marijuana from an undercover officer in a federal narcotics sting. The transaction had been meticulously planned. Investigators placed an undercover agent to pose as a supplier, while recording the entire meeting with hidden cameras and audio devices. On December 13, 2011, Hopkins drove a rented SUV to an industrial area in Avondale, roughly 30 kilometers from Phoenix. He carried nearly $100,000 in cash inside a black duffel bag. As soon as he stepped out of the vehicle, a SWAT team and state police units surrounded him. Inside the car, and his bag officers found cash. 2 cell phones, contact records, and handwritten transaction notes enough to charge him with possession, transportation, and conspiracy to distribute a controlled substance, each carrying a potential 5-year prison sentence. It was a fall that shocked America. People still remembered the young black boy in Lean on Me crying and begging Morgan Freeman's character to let him back into school, trembling, as he said, "I don't want to die, sir." Now he stood before real cameras, not on a film set, but inside Maricopa County Jail. When the story broke, the public was stunned. The same Sams who once cried on screen was now in handcuffs. Bet ran the headline, "From Hollywood to Handcuffs." The man once hailed as one of the most natural talents in urban American cinema was now a suspect in a federal drug case. ABC 15 Arizona quoted police as saying, "We have reason to believe Hopkins was involved in marijuana trafficking for profit, not personal use." Major outlets including Los Angeles Times, HuffPost, and New York Daily News all covered the arrest. Most people couldn't believe it. Jermaine Hopkins, the once innocent kid of Hollywood, had become a drug dealer. The trial and a controversial defense. The trial took place in early 2012 at the Maricopa County Court in Phoenix. Hopkins, then 37, pleaded guilty to possession and transportation of a controlled substance. His defense attorney described him as a desperate father who just wanted to provide a decent Christmas for his family. That statement quickly went viral, sparking heated debate. Some saw it as proof of how Hollywood had abandoned its black actors, who once carried its hopes. But most people were unforgiving. As the Los Angeles Times wrote, "No one risks 200 pounds of marijuana just to buy toys for their kids." The judge sentenced him to 30 days in jail and 3 years of probation, a lenient verdict given that Hopkins had no prior criminal record, cooperated with authorities, and expressed remorse. After his release, he briefly appeared on television saying, "I'm not a criminal. I just made a mistake." The court may have gone easy on him, but Hollywood did not. Studios and networks cut all ties. No interviews, no new contracts. A producer who had once worked with him told Vibe magazine, "No one wants to work with a guy caught with 200 pounds of weed. That's a dealer's number, not a mistake." 2017, when the past came back. 6 years later, in October 2017, Jermaine Hopkins' name appeared again in American crime news. According to WRAL News in North Carolina, Apex police stopped his vehicle for speeding. During the search, they found 5.7 pounds, about 2.5 kilograms of marijuana in the trunk, along with empty plastic bags and a digital scale tools typically used for packaging drugs. This time, Hopkins was charged with possession with intent to distribute. There were no more excuses about Christmas or family. Court records show that he pleaded guilty, receiving a 24-month suspended sentence, community supervision, and forfeiture of his vehicle. The story did not make major headlines like it had in 2011, but for longtime fans, it marked the end. The Shade Room wrote, "The boy who once cried in Lean on Me has finally ended up where his character began, lost. Aftermath and the fall from grace." After his second arrest in 2017, Jermaine Hopkins disappeared from Hollywood as if he had never existed. Old ad campaigns were pulled, his social media accounts deleted, and his name erased from casting lists of major studios. To the public, Steal from Juice had become a memory, a faded symbol of the 1990s. Hopkins left Los Angeles, the city that had once made him a star, and then devoured him without mercy. He moved to North Carolina, settling in a small rented house in Durham. Here, he said, "People just know me as Jermaine, not as an actor." At first, Hopkins fell into depression and financial crisis. According to the Baltimore Sun, he entered therapy and relied on support from the Screen Actors Guild SAG-AFTRA emergency fund. During those years, he cut off contact with nearly everyone from the industry. But quietly, he began rebuilding himself not through movies, but by teaching acting to local black children. His small classes, sometimes only 5 to 7 kids, took place in churches or community centers. He taught them how to read lines and express emotions before a camera. But in truth, he was teaching them something deeper: how not to let life drown them. "I can't give these kids money," he said in a phone-recorded video, "but I can give them hope. I teach them how to stand in front of a camera. But really, I'm teaching them how to stand strong in life." Jermaine Hopkins was no longer the teenage star he once was, but a man who had climbed, fallen, and was learning how to rise again. Money, fame, and the price of the spotlight. When Lean on Me was released in 1989, Jermaine Hopkins was just 14. The boy from the Newark projects suddenly became a movie phenomenon, holding his first checks worth more than his mother's yearly income. For Hopkins, it wasn't just money, it was the first time poverty no longer controlled his life. In a rare interview, he recalled, "I never thought I'd get paid to act. I just thought, if I could help my mom pay the rent, that would be enough." According to Hopkins, the paycheck from Lean on Me allowed him to buy about 20 acres of land in North Carolina as a gift for his mother, so she could see trees instead of concrete walls. But that joy didn't last long. At 14, no one had taught him about financial management, investment, or saving. The movie money vanished quickly. Some spent helping relatives, the rest lost to the new friends that Hollywood had brought into his life. Those who worked with him said Hopkins was generous to a fault. He always carried cash, loved to pick up the tab, and often helped strangers, as if he was afraid that saying no would bring back the poverty he'd escaped. By the time of his first arrest in 2011, court documents showed Hopkins had only a few $1,000s left in his bank account. Friends said most of his earnings were gone due to impulsive spending and lack of long-term planning. Later sites like Celebrity Net Worth estimated his fortune at around $10,000, a symbolic figure marking the steep fall of a teen star once known across America. When the spotlight no longer saves you. One moment. Jermaine Hopkins was a sought-after actor. The next, he was arrested with nearly 6 pounds of marijuana in his car. Just a few years earlier, that number had been 200 pounds in a federal undercover sting in Arizona. People asked, why would you risk everything? But for someone raised in survival mode, the answer was never simple. Poverty rewires the brain. It leaves behind scarcity, thinking, distrust, and the constant drive to hustle. Fame can change your address, but it can't rewire the instincts that grew from danger. Hopkins once said he felt most comfortable around the bad guys. People who didn't judge him, who spoke his language, who shared his past. In them, he saw the rough kind of freedom that his childhood in Brick City had made him crave. For child stars, success comes fast and hits hard. Money pours in, attention surrounds them, but no one teaches them how to process pressure, how to say no to temptation, or how to live once the cameras stop rolling. Hopkins was only 14 when Lean on Me came out, 17 when he filmed Juice. He grew up in front of the camera, but behind it no one taught him how to live with fame. Put it all together: childhood trauma, sudden fame, no safety net, and the pull of old habits, and Hopkins' legal troubles no longer seem random. The road to redemption was never smooth. 2 drug arrests left dark stains that could have erased everything. But instead of letting them define him, he chose to face them, own them, and keep moving. The quiet comeback. When everyone thought he had given up, Hopkins quietly reappeared, no big promotions, no headlines. In 2020, he appeared in Equal Standard, an independent film about police violence and racial injustice in New York. It was a small role, but enough to remind audiences that he was still here. A critic from blackfilm.com wrote, "Hopkins doesn't act, he remembers. His old pain becomes new material." A year later, he appeared in Asbury Park 2021, an indie film about faith loss and redemption themes that mirrored his own life. Though the movie had a limited release, Hopkins earned praise for his quiet, authentic performance full of the depth of a man who had lived through everything. Outside of film, he began joining small podcasts and YouTube talk shows, speaking about his lost years, his addiction to fame, and the loneliness that came when the lights went out. "No one ever taught me how to keep the spotlight," he said. "I just tried not to get swallowed by it." No longer chasing fame, Hopkins chose simplicity. He taught acting, made short films, and worked with programs supporting young black teens. The man who had twice been arrested for drugs had become someone who taught about choices and second chances. A bitter irony, but also proof that wounds can turn into lessons. The era of red carpets and cameras was over. Now Jermaine Hopkins was no longer a star, but a survivor in every sense of the word. He no longer needed roles to prove his worth, nor Hollywood to validate his existence. All he needed was peace. "I used to be that kid who wanted to be seen on TV," he said. "Now I just want the kids around me to see a real life." And perhaps in that quiet, Hopkins is writing his final role, not as a perfect man, but as a truthful one. Not glorious, but still full of hope. The bigger picture, from talent to cautionary tale. Looking back, Jermaine Hopkins was never just an individual who fell from grace. He was the product of a system of a Hollywood that celebrated black actors when they were profitable, then abandoned them once they were no longer useful. The Atlantic once wrote, "Hopkins is the perfect example of a generation of young actors who were exploited and forgotten. When the lights go out, they lose their income, their direction, and are rejected by the very society they once reflected." Sociologists have pointed out that scandals like Hopkins's are not merely personal failures, but fractures in an industry that offers no safety net for young people who find fame too soon. He grew up in 1980s Newark during the height of the crack epidemic. He rose too fast, but no one taught him how to survive when success faded. And when the spotlight dimmed, Hopkins didn't fall because of greed. He simply returned to the only thing he'd ever truly known: survival. If Lean on Me once saved him from the darkness, then real life became the unwritten sequel. Jermaine Hopkins may no longer stand on stage, but he's learning to stand steady in life. And perhaps that more than fame is the role of a lifetime. Few people know that behind early fame and bright movie posters, Jermaine Hopkins has always been a family man. Private life, when the stage is empty. According to multiple sources, he was married to Renee Williams, a woman who rarely appeared in public, and they share 3 children. However, Hopkins has almost never mentioned his wife or kids in the media. No photos, no posts, no interviews. He once said, "People think I lost everything, but I still have my family, and that's what keeps me alive." After Juice, when Hollywood lights still shone on him, Hopkins avoided parties and industry events. In the 2000s, he lived quietly with his family in suburban Los Angeles, then permanently moved to Durham, North Carolina after 2017. According to the Baltimore Sun, following his 2017 arrest, Hopkins went through a long period of depression and therapy. During that time, his family was his only anchor. His wife, who had always stayed outside the spotlight, stood by him, helping him overcome his psychological addiction to the past. A longtime friend said in a small podcast, he used to sit for hours just staring at his kids' photos and say, "They don't need a star. They need a father who can stand strong." Though he no longer stands on stage, Jermaine Hopkins still plays his most important role: father, husband, and survivor. He no longer tries to reclaim old fame. He just tries to be a better man in the present. "I used to think losing Hollywood meant losing everything," he said. But it turns out that's when I finally found myself. In 2024, when everyone thought Jermaine Hopkins had vanished for good, his name suddenly returned not in a scandal, but on the small screen. 2024, Jermaine Hopkins returns back on screen in Sebastian. In April 2024, WCCB Charlotte reported that Hopkins had appeared in Sebastian, a horror drama airing on the CW. No longer the defiant schoolboy he once was, Hopkins now played a man haunted by past mistakes, a small but powerful role that felt almost autobiographical. "I like roles where people don't know whether to pity me or fear me," he said in a short interview in Charlotte, "because I've been both." Hopkins' scene in Sebastian lasted only a few minutes, but audiences recognized that same look, the one that made viewers shiver in Lean on Me 3 decades earlier. A local journalist wrote, "Hopkins doesn't need dialogue. The weariness and pride in his eyes tell his entire story." The film didn't cause a sensation, but it marked the first time in years that Jermaine Hopkins returned as a professional actor, not as the fallen star from old headlines. 2024 was also the year he returned to social media. His Instagram account began posting videos and behind-the-scenes photos. In a short clip from August 13, 2024, Hopkins spoke softly to his followers. "No one ever came to teach me how to keep the spotlight, but now I'm learning how to live this time for me." Recent photos show him living simply in North Carolina, often joining community events and appearing with his young acting students. In one post, he wrote, "No lights needed, only faith." Fans on Reddit and X, formerly Twitter, started calling him the quiet comeback, from lost icon to survivor's symbol. Independent entertainment outlets like Black Film and Culture Pulse now call Jermaine Hopkins one of the rare faces of quiet redemption. No scandals, no stunts, no blockbuster projects. Just a middle-aged man who once fell to the bottom, now reclaiming his dignity, step by step. In March 2025, Hopkins appeared on a YouTube talk show hosted by underground artists in Raleigh. The host asked, "Do you regret it, all that's happened?" He smiled short and calm. "I don't regret it. I just wish I'd known how to appreciate the light while I was still in it." The quote quickly spread across TikTok and was shared by dozens of film pages, a quiet, bittersweet confession from a man who had truly survived, no longer a fallen star. Today, Hopkins is no longer a symbol of failure or scandal. He has become a mentor for young black actors running small workshops in Durham. The kids who discovered Juice on YouTube don't realize that the gray-haired man with the raspy voice once graced magazine covers as America's teen movie star. One of his students recalled, "He always tells us, don't let other people write your story. If they do, they'll always end it in tragedy." That line sounds like Hopkins rewriting his own ending one without red carpets, but with the soft light of peace, the future unknown, but the present restored. As of 2025, Jermaine Hopkins still lives in North Carolina. He still teaches, still posts about his students, and still takes small acting roles. He doesn't talk about Hollywood money or fame. He simply says, "I didn't come back to be famous. I came back so I wouldn't disappear." 35 years after Lean on Me, Jermaine Hopkins is still here. Not dazzling, but real warm and whole. And perhaps in this simplicity, he has finally found what neither fame nor fortune ever gave him: a life that is small but full and true.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore. Stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.